Afghanistan Research Initiative seminar series. And the Afghanistan Research Initiative is based at the University of Central Asia in Bishkek, Kyrgyz Republic. And it is a program supported by the International Research Development Center Canada and the Aga Khan Foundation Canada. It is part of the part of the Graduate School of Development, and it has a very broad remit to promote research and publication on Afghanistan. And we have been around for 3 years, and we're going to be around for at least another 3 years. So we do lots of research. We support lots of research, and we and our researchers are very prolific. We have a newsletter that you should consider subscribing to. We can get it to you. That you'll see that we have that reports on all of the research that is produced by the network of ARI, and also it gives profiles of Afghan scholars around the world and what other people are doing. So it tries to be an information hub about Afghanistan. So very happy to have Asim deliver this lecture. Not too many Afghans end up in Okinawa, in this wonderful place at the University of the Ryukyus, if I pronounce it correctly. And
Ryukyus, yeah.
What?
Ryukyus.
Ryukyus, okay. Well, it's not going to work. I give up. So he's got a PhD in a field called interdisciplinary intelligent engineering systems from the Ryukyus University, and he also completed a civil engineering degree at that university and is currently a postdoctoral research there. And he is a non-resident research fellow at the Afghanistan Research Initiative. He's quite a prolific author. You'll see if you'll read our newsletter, he's published a number of articles on Herat, and his latest contribution in 2024 is on material transformation analysis of mosques in Herat Old City in Afghanistan. Ajmal is somebody who has vast experience in work with the Aga Khan Trust for Culture that has done absolutely remarkable work in Afghanistan. I've met Ajmal several times and listened to his bold projects and old cities, the mosque and the gardens and all of that. So I think it's extremely interesting that he is an architect, but very much somebody implementing restorations of old cities with an approach, I guess, that they should not just be museums, but they are supposed to have a life. So we have somebody who is Asim, who is fairly technical. He's comes from interdisciplinary intelligent engineering, and someone like Ajmal, who works in a practical way and leads in a practical way the work of the Aga Khan Culture Services, it's now called. And it was very rewarding for me to see, as somebody who was tied to the network, that Asim refers to the work. And it's sort of recognized as highly significant in the scholarly literature. So I'm glad people are making the connection. Okay. Enough. Asim, it's your show. So
Okay, thank you.
I will cut you off after a little while so that Ajmal can make his comments.
Thank you so much, respected Professor Gulam. And I welcome Mr. Maywendi as well. It is nice to be with you today and have this presentation although it is at the initial stages of analysis and writing. It is not published yet, this one. Even we have not submitted to any journal yet. Anyway, thank you so much.
Go ahead, start.
I can go ahead?
Yes, yes, please.
Okay. The work that I present here is supported by the University of Central Asia in Kyrgyzstan and the University of Ryukyus in Japan. The financial support was provided by ARI project of the University of Central Asia. The outline of this presentation comprises 4 chapters, of which the second is the framework for developing a basic policy, and chapter 3, basic policy for landscape preservation. In cities where war and rapid urban growth happen and experience rapid economic growth, such as Afghanistan, Malaysia, Singapore 50, 60 years ago, usually cultural heritage are often demolished and replaced by modern high-rise buildings. So that countries came and their governments came with plans to make policies to protect the heritage assets, urban landscapes, and also the um, urban facilities. One of the greatest examples, as you see here, um, one of the greatest examples is Japan. Japanese regulations and urban conservation policy in preserving Kyoto's architecture, as you see, figures C, D, and E, show the photos of, for example, a shrine in a castle, tradition.
Asim, you have to upload your slides. We can't see anything.
You can see?
No, 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 no.
Oh, sorry.
So there's
I
a
thought,
thing, there's a function called upload slides.
um,
You had
I
them to begin
shared,
with.
I shared the slides.
Well, you have to share the slides. There's a function called share. It's a green one.
Yes.
So press the share so that you can.
Can you see now?
Oh, now we have it there. So you can continue talking about. Yes, now we see it.
So
Okay.
shall I start from beginning?
No, because you're starting from the beginning to say
Okay,
who
okay.
you are.
Yeah.
Get right to the point. Okay, you've already covered
Okay.
this. Next, yeah,
As I
here.
said, one of the greatest examples is Japan. Another great example for preservation of architectural heritage is Singapore. I have been to more than 10 countries, but I chose 2 of them here to show you. As you see here, in C, D, and E, you can see examples of, for example, shrine. In D, example of traditional houses, Japanese traditional houses in an urban area, which totally is preserved. Or in E, as you see, a shrine. Thousands, millions of people watch them, and tourists go everywhere there. Another great example that has preserved its heritage assets in large scale is Singapore. I chose one of the smallest towns in Singapore, which is called Chinatown. This one in A. As you see here in B, this temple, which is called as Buddha Tooth Relic Temple, is located in Chinatown, and this temple is preserved inside tens of high-rise buildings, very advanced with advanced technology constructed. There are a lot of research done For example, a research article by Sim Lo Lee has indicated that the Singapore's policy has succeeded in preserving the historic old shop houses to a large extent. After the UNESCO office in Kabul was established in 1948, no serious measures of preservation were taken for mosques by the or other structures by the government. In early 2002, the Aga Khan Development Network, AKDN, activated the Aga Khan Trust for Culture, Aga Khan Trust for Culture, or AKTC, having the aim to accomplish the socio-economic growth that had been pledged in the Bonn Agreement in 2001. A cultural heritage conservation mission was launched in May 2005 and then continued until 2011 in the whole city of Herat. In 2004, the law on preservation of historic and cultural heritage of Afghanistan was approved to protect the country's heritage assets. Another law was signed and approved in 2005. And also, an engagement was done to make an agreement for the conservation of tangible cultural heritage in 2005 in Herat. In general, these laws and the AKTC restoration, AKTC or Aga Khan Trust for Culture restorations, led to a formal registration, marking, and safeguarding of the traditional mosques and other monuments in the old city, as well as the proposal to put Herat's name on the UNESCO heritage site at the time. As you see here, the Aga Khan works have been multidimensional. Based on AKT's commitment in 2001 on Bonn Conference to restore the nation's urban heritage, particularly its heritage, cultural heritage, that was of great urgency at the time. The overall mission of the AKTC activities in Afghanistan is to contribute to the economic and social development of Afghanistan's metropolitan area. As you see here in the photos, Aga Khan restored tens of or hundreds of projects in Herat, which comprised, for example, mosques, dalans, caravanserais, Herat Citadel, tens of mosques and cisterns, as you see, Charge Souk cistern, for example, and shops. The AKTC restoration was so comprehensive, and it was divided into two types of full-scale and partial restoration. An example of full-scale restoration is shown here, which is the Malik Mosque or Malik Cistern. As you see here, the restoration is comprised the total restoration, complete full restoration of the horizontal and vertical dimensions of the mosques and cisterns. It means it restored all the buildings, all facilities, all the equipments. As you see, they are numbered here. And in addition to that, the cistern, which is inside the complex, the mosque complex, was also completely fully restored to the original condition. This is an example of the mosques which were restored by AKTC only in one quarter. I did not put all, I just analyzed one quarter. The Citadel quarter, Pozot quarter, which is, the name is Pozot quarter. In this area, we found that almost all, majority of the mosques were preserved by the AKTC organization. As you see here, a study, the source is written here, a study by me and my professor analyzed the typology of the mosques And then we found that the restoration which was done by AKTC was a very great restoration by the term of in terms of technicality and professionality. How? As you see here, these are the periods. We found that each or any mosque which was preserved by AKTC come from a different period, a different period. Most of them are like this, except these three that come from one period. So the AKCT selection team was, I think, very interesting. They had good team because at the time there was no typological analysis, there was no academic literature on the mosque. So their job was very interesting. Anyway, um, a lot of research have been done by several researchers. For example, Najmi in 1988, Samimi um,
Asim is speaking from Herat on through SMS cards, so he may get stuck every now and then. Asim, can you hear? Okay, Ajmal, were you involved in any of these things in Herat? Well, we're waiting for Asim to reconnect.
Yeah, yes, Boran, thank you. Yeah, we had a program, what we call a area development program in the old city of Herat, which started in 2024. And as Asim mentioned, perhaps some of the figures may vary, but we restored in the initial period we were in Herat until 2011. In the initial 7-year period, we restored something like 48 different sites. Now, these would be public sites, public buildings, critical infrastructure for the community, but we also did a lot of work in developing pathways and drainage in the old city of Herat. That's the distinction I would make between some of the work we do and some of the work perhaps that other organizations such as UNESCO does is we really focus down on infrastructure or historic sites that are critical to communities, living sites, sites that continue to be used by people, such as, for example, for hygiene purposes, hammams, traditional hammams, or houses, or madrasas, mosques, shrines, things that will then also be maintained by the community. One of the tables that Asima just showed, I think, indicated that some of these sites continue to be kept by AKTC, which is in fact not accurate because most of the sites that we've restored, we've handed back to the community, and it's the community that maintain these sites together with municipality and other local authorities. So that's very important aspect of the work. There was a period when we were no longer working in Herat. I think we refocused our priorities and our strategies led us to northern Afghanistan and Balkh. But more recently, since 2019, we do have an operation in Herat again. And now we're working at something called the Musalla complex, which is a very important Timurid era, so 15th century, 14th century complex in just north of the old city of Herat, where we're working on structural stabilization of some of the key monuments. So, I mean, I
Okay.
wouldn't, yeah.
This 15th century, is that what Queen Gawhashad did?
Exactly. It's Queen Gawarshad's madrasa that we're working on, her mosque and
Well,
her tomb.
it's
Yeah.
absolutely phenomenal that in a Timur Empire period, the queen should actually be the one that directs building and construction in the 15th century. I
Oh,
mean,
she was very, yeah, she was very powerful. I mean, her husband Shah Rukh was the king, and she led those programs. In fact, there's a precedence for that. At the moment, AKTC is working, just beginning projects in Uzbekistan as well, and we're working on something called the Bibi Khanum Mosque in Samarkand, and that also was a project that was initiated by Timur himself, but mainly followed through by his wife, Bibi Khanum herself. And so Timur would be the father of Shah Rukh, for example, and the capital would have been moved from Samarkand to Herat just after Timur's death. So there is a precedence for that. It's quite remarkable.
so just for everybody, Asim is still trying to reconnect with his SIM cards because he's sitting in Herat. Asim, can you hear me? Well, as soon as he comes in, he'll pick it up.
Hmm,
So,
hmm.
continue talking.
Yeah. No, I was going to mention that as Asim highlighted in some of his slides, I think the critical aspect of work is to work with communities and also local institutions. And for us, that involved engagement with Herat municipality. And again, as Hasim mentioned, in areas of post-conflict and post-war, these institutions tend to lack the resources and perhaps sometimes the capacities to be able to engage in a very critical way. The notion of preservation, of balancing between development, new construction, even speculative development, and the need to preserve heritage and history and historic quarters. So for us, we established something what we called the Old City Commission, which really brought together a lot of the actors, including key figures from municipality, but also from the community. As you can imagine, also another product of long duration conflict is that the relationship between institutions and their beneficiaries, the people, they become lost. Those tenuous fragments of connections become lost. So to re-engage the community with the custodians of the city, I think is a very important aspect of bringing people back together with government institutions. So that became the platform through which we were able to identify the projects and do extensive surveys, socioeconomic surveys, and start our restoration program.
What's the balance between restore and rebuild?
Well, restoration really, I mean, if you want to make it more complicated, there's the word conservation as well. So conservation would be finding a building in a existing situation. And in fact, it applies to all kinds of things, artifacts, objects, museum objects, buildings, sites, structures, would be to retain it in its existing condition, whatever condition that might be. Restoration means you go one step further. You start to expand or perhaps to make it usable or functional for whatever purpose it's been designed or perhaps for new purposes. And reconstruction essentially means that the balance between retaining the old and inserting the new is shifted. You're doing more new work as opposed to restoring or keeping the old. And that's where reconstruction comes. And we've had to do reconstruction on instances, especially where the old structures have been in such bad condition that we needed to do partial reconstruction of other aspects of the same building to be able to protect and safeguard and consolidate the structures. So
Ajmal,
right.
you saw Asim's. I think it's very unfortunate that he can't. We're having problem connecting. You saw Asim's slides. What would you comment on them? What are some of the slides? What are some of the things you would want to say about them?
I mean, I think Asim's research, as he indicated, is really in ongoing, and there's a lot more work that needs to be done, of course. But I think anyone looking at Herat from a planning perspective, critically, would need to really look at the institutions that are there, designed in the city for the purpose of expanding the city, developing city, but also as part of their mandate, maintaining the city, its heritage and its history. There's been some work done also by Florence University in terms of plans and master plans. And so really the balance between civic infrastructure, public property, and then also communal spaces where people can gather. And Herat, the old city of Herat, is still the commercial heart of the city, which means that there's a lot of commercial pressure in a very dense residential area as well. So I think, coming up with plans, zoning, regulations, and then trying to strike a balance between having a healthy, thriving old city, which would include elements of commerce and residential and also public services, balancing that with the need to preserve these areas. And there's a lot of investment that would then also need to go into the infrastructure, the shared infrastructure, the alleyways, the streets, the drainage systems. One of the projects that Asim showed, of course, is the Malek cistern. And that's another innovation, I would say, of the Timurids, where they, because of the lack of space in the old city, they combined several different functions into one kind of armature, one kind of structure. So in the case of the Malek cistern, you also have a water cistern, which Herat was famous for. Um, I think one of the earlier cities in Afghanistan or in this region, which formalized the direction, the containment, and the redistribution of water, urban water for both potable and irrigation purposes in these wonderful covered cisterns where they could be maintained and temperature and also its purity could be maintained. Combining that program with a mosque, for example, or in another building that we've worked on, which is called the Charsuk water cistern. There's a commercial aspect in that structure, which is one of the largest cisterns in Afghanistan mixed with some covered markets. So really innovative uses of programs. What we would today refer to as multi-purpose mixed use buildings, which actually were developed much earlier, half a millennia ago. I think that's critical importance. And also advocacy, raising awareness of the general population, because it is the Heratis themselves who, over the last 2 decades, have become wealthier. And there he is.
Okay, so we had Ajmal carrying on the discussion. So Asim, please come back. Asim, unmute yourself. We can't hear you. Unmute. Can't hear you. Unmute. Can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear, Professor?
I can hear you, yeah.
I'm sorry, my internet was disconnected.
No, we
But
understand. So let's get on with it because we're going to be running out of time.
I finished. Thank
Okay, you can skip this slide.
you.
Because we already had, we want to see the other stuff.
Okay.
Here we go. No, we've seen this slide.
Okay.
We've seen this slide. The next one.
Okay. So as I said that there is no research on basic policy, as well as there is no basic policy in Afghanistan regarding the cultural protection. And also the transformations that we have observed during our field observations also show that there is an urgent need for making a policy for a protection of the cultural heritage in Herat. As you see here, this is one of the parks of Herat. In 2018, I myself came to this park. I visited this park and took a lot of photos there with my friends. As you see here, these photos on the left show the 2018 photos, but as you see on the left, these parks have been transformed, converted into buildings. What kind of buildings? Hotels, restaurants, simply restaurants. Herat, which does not have enough parks, even the existing parks are being transformed into buildings. And the landscape is destroyed. The environment is destroyed. So we believe that there is a strong need for studying basic policy and making a basic policy. In addition to that, only AKTC, Aga Khan Trust Culture, has spent over 7 million US dollars in Herat. Imagine if we combine all other money that is spent on the cultural heritage in Herat, but we don't have a simple basic policy, you will understand how the situation is. Afghanistan is a multicultural, multi-ethnic in the Central Asia, and Herat is in the west of Afghanistan. And we chose Herat city and the old city particularly and its suburbs to consider the architectural heritage and the landscape. And with a consideration of architectural heritage and landscape, make a basic policy for the city. As Herat Old City has experienced heavy transformations during the democratic period from 2001 until 2021, it has to create a landscape plan that incorporates the following purposes. Purpose one, revitalizing unique places by preserving the existing iconic local heritage sites, such as the preserved traditional mosques, cisterns, historic houses, shrines that existed since long times ago. A kind of surprising view would be made by connecting and watching these landmarks in the old city of Herat. In order to build a new perspective displays of Herat that will be maintaining, preserving the traditional landscape and modern scenery, great landscapes that are appropriate for the coming future should be constructed by applying contemporary ideas while protecting and reviving the historical landscape. Revitalizing diverse and unique places by utilizing and rehabilitating and restoring local features such as Maidan Gozar that have emerged from people's daily settings and activities. A broader urban landscape will be created by connecting these places in the old city of Herat and its surroundings. Improve traditional landscapes and baghcha, for example, which is a small garden or green area within each house in a small scale, with the aim of creating an urban environment in harmony with the traditional nature of the city. Beautiful landscapes increase the city's worth and can attract tourists and locals, gather human resources, as well as it can increase the economic activities in tourism, industry, and knowledge sectors as well. In order to promote the concept that landscape belongs to everyone, the city must encourage residents to be aware of the old city's landscape as well as share a sense of value for their local communities. It is anticipated that a number of stakeholders, including public as a whole, corporations, companies, or government agencies, will understand the importance of the old city's landscapes and Herat city's landscapes and collaborate to create a better environment through their individual capacities and so on. The method we used here included literature review, data collection, data analysis, and the findings. The findings are divided into landscape improvement, preservation policy, and proposals for the landscape improving. Usually, there are a few components that make up a city, including the natural landscape and artificial creations like houses, buildings, dwellings, and other types of facilities. Building height has a major impact on the overall appearance of the urban landscape. As the old city of Herat lies in a flat valley, its buildings must take into consideration the relationship with the surrounding buildings and landmarks. So because of this, the UNESCO and the Afghan government have imposed a basic policy, as you see here in this figure, on building heights, which is 7 meters in the core zone of Herat city, However, there is no height restriction in the outer areas of the old city, not even in the vicinity of the Gazerga, which is the main, the core zone of Herat as well. So, in addition to that, we can see Mosalla here in the north of the old city. Mosalla complex, which is one of the country's most iconic landmarks and is a few hundred meters away from the old city. Although the Mosalla complex itself is located in the northmost area of the core zone, we can say, a number of high-rise buildings are being developed around the Mosalla complex, which endanger the view of the in terms of landscape. Sorry. I believe based on our field surveys that we did, we found that there should be more sites to be put in the preservation plan of Herat. As you see here, previously UNESCO and government included the old city and Gazerga. They have not put, for example, Baghdad, which is the focus of several academic research recently, and there are a lot of traditional houses in the area. There are some sites that have partial traditional landscape, traditional houses, as you see here. Then they are numbered as 3, 4, 5, and 6, and 7. Building height is regulated by the city's basic policy for basic rules, we can say, for height control. It is also essential to take into account regional and urban features as well. The old city of Herat, as a historical city, has many areas. It includes from low-rise residential area in the core zone, as previously I showed the photos, and the citadel, the Grand Mosque, which are nominated the sites for the UNESCO World Heritage Site today, as well as the Mosalla complex and the Gazerga in the northern part of the Herat city. The core zone, as I previously said, has a 7-meter height restriction. One of the distinctive features of Herat Old City is the dense aerial view of the domed or vault roofs covering a wide range of area as a cluster. Based on some surveys based on a survey and a publication in 2019, the link is at the end of the presentation, 54% of the houses surveyed had domed roof in 2019 in the old city, while the rest had flat roofs at the time, showing an increase in flat roofs. In order to encourage the installation of domed roofs, the city can relax a 1-meter height control in traditional house roofs and 1-meter height control in traditional landmarks such as mosques and cisterns. In addition, we propose that for the modern buildings also, the government should persuade the residents to build domed roofs or domical walled roofs, which can make the landscape of Herat beautiful as traditional, looking traditional. The environment of Herat is featured by the abundance of gardens, water cisterns, caravanserais, and green spaces that were fed by canals within the urban areas that ran through the residential houses in the city. The present-day environment of the historic city and Herat has its roots in the international landscape that our ancestors originally observed and developed. The historical landscape of cities, the traditional alleyways, gozar centers, canal networks, and important historical properties such as mosques, synagogues, shrines, citadels, and grand mosque. This kind of excellent natural and historical landscape can be preserved by creation of a basic policy, which will incorporate at least 5 pillars that we found here and explain. Preservation of historical sites, maintaining scenic landscape, maintaining traditional landscapes, conserving green zones, and preserving landmarks and traditional houses. There are several places that have unique landscapes, such as the surrounding areas and sites of the minarets in the north of the old city, citadel, the Grand Mosque of Herat and its park, and so on. Historic sites of scenic and green importance should be designated as historical site conservation zones. This is our proposal. There should be more significant parts of the mentioned districts designated as special historic site conservation zones, because we are in a different situation than 2005, 2010. So we should have some more serious activities and rules to have special historic site conservation zones. Any changes to historical sites, such as demolition, transformation, reconstruction, developments of houses, and construction or reconstruction, and the cutting of trees even, must be approved in advance by the mayor and council that we suggest. There should be a council formed by different authorities from different organizations to observe the changes in the old city and its surroundings. Every change in the district other than daily maintenance to protect the historical site should be strictly forbidden. This policy is one of the basics. The council's or mayor's prior approval should be required for any modification, any type of modification or changes. This is also a very serious issue we have observed. Land use should also be restricted in such a way that it would seriously hinder the use of the land. When this occurs, the beneficiaries of the land may not be willing to change the historical sites or their own. The city needs a scenic landscape system zone, we propose it. Why? To preserve the beautiful landscapes and maintain a favorable living environment by preserving the original natural environment. The city should designate also a kind of scenic landscape zone, or we can say district, to preserve the natural environments with green hillsides of the earthen wall, parks of the grand mosques, different grand mosques, historical properties and the residential areas. Edifices, buildings, houses, and other facilities are usually subject to standards, should be subject to standards in scenic landscape zones. In addition to that, areas are divided into, should be divided into 3 types at least. From type 1 to type 3 based on local characteristics like the living environment and the green space. Within the areas, for example, buildings must meet certain height and surface requirements and should have a certain amount of green space. They should be calculated by the experts and professionals. Anyway, whenever new buildings are constructed or planned to be constructed, land is modified usually, or trees are cut. The council, there should be a very strong council that must approve these changes in advance. Unfortunately, we have seen that people can't destroy, distract, reconstruct, and then the council, no council, sorry, there is no council. We did not find any council recently in our research. The mayor, staff, managers, engineers, field surveyors understand and find out, oh, this beautiful building is destroyed. This beautiful landmark is destroyed. Anyway. To pass this kind of valuable view, architecture and heritage down to the future generations of Afghanistan and the future generations of Herat city, the city should enact at least the Herat city ordinance. There should be an ordinance or a rule or a kind of rule on the conservation of natural landscape as soon as possible. This is our proposal as well. Through this ordinance, the city should designate most of urban control area. For example, they should determine how many hectares they have as natural landscape conservation district along the Herat River. And the natural landscape conservation plan should define the basic policy for the conservation of natural landscape and the designation of the districts. By conserving green spaces, citizens can live in a comfortable, healthy, and culturally rich environment. In order to preserve green spaces in the city, a conservation area law should be imposed. This is also a proposal that the government should do. In order to preserve green spaces in the suburbs of Herat around the old city or in the long distances, or along the Herat River, the city should designate areas in the suburbs covering large woodlands, we call in Persian jangal, jangalot, around the Herat River, Pashtunpul, and Pul Malan. Urban greenery conservation zones should be determined for public areas and private homes whose greenery is at risk due to informal or illegal redevelopment and reconstruction and expansion.
Asim, you have to start winding down because we're running out of time.
Okay.
Just go to the last slide.
To the last slide?
Well, because you've got a minute.
Okay. Anyway, we the city should work to preserve, renovate, and design an urban environment that complements each unique local feature. The city should also have improvement of landscape by designating landscape district. They should find some district that have architectural features and assets and determine them. The city also should have the improvement of urban lands by designating structure improvement district. We can find such places in the north of Herat mountain ranges. There should also be some standards. For example, wall materials, balcony, outer wall color, gate wall, hedge, and similar items as well. We can designate the systems for the preservation and revitalization as shown in the table, how to do it and what terms. As I told you previously, we should determine and find and introduce the new sites for conservation and preservation in addition to the old city. We should preserve them. A zoning system exists in the old city. The core zone height is 7 meters, but we introduce new zoning system for the new sites. We should preserve the historical sites, one, scenic landscape, traditional landscape, the green zones, and the landmarks. The city should work to preserve, renovate, and design an urban environment to complement the unique characteristics of each locality. Improvement of landscape includes several parameters that we discussed before. So Herat should strategically select areas influenced by historical allies and urban landscape and develop plans specific to each region to safeguard and exploit them. We found at least 10 sites, but we included 7 sites in this presentation. We are working on other sites and examining how much to add more in the future. The preservation of the city's height, roofs, wall, alley, traditional landmarks, and also houses, as well as the preservation of beautiful historical landscape can contribute to the preservation of the old city.
Asim, you have to wrap up.
And these are the basic policies that we recommend for the Herat city.
Mm-hmm.
And this is also the conclusion on standards, on how to make standards in the Herat.
Okay.
And this is our comment. Thank you so much.
Okay, let me ask you a question. Thank you very much for that presentation. Let me ask
I'm
you.
sorry for the disconnection.
Well, it's not your fault. This is a project that is supposed to prepare a policy and a plan for the government.
Yeah.
In the research that you've done, you discussed this with very many stakeholders, with the communities, and this sort of stuff. So I guess there are two questions. Who is going to carry this? What's the carriage? What is the likelihood of these kinds of policies being adapted? And well, I guess that's the question. You've done all of this work. Is there consensus among the stakeholders that something like this is required? Answer very briefly.
In Japan, based on my experience, the executive force or the government institutions like municipality and other organizations that work on the heritage are connected directly to the academic institutions. When there is a research done on the field, the executives go and search for the research paper or a thesis or anything. And they use the research findings in their drafting their rules, regulations, policies, or anything which is related. But in Afghanistan, unfortunately, that environment has not been made until yet. There is no strong connection between the academics and the executives. The planners, I mean, the planners and the researchers do not have such a moral and a social obligation or responsibility, I can say.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, when we do a research, we ourselves, for example, I go to the related offices and say, I did this kind of research, and this is for you. You can use this research to conduct planning in the city. So usually they should follow the researchers. The planners should follow the researchers. But in Afghanistan, it is opposite, opposite compared to Japan. We are the people who go to the offices and ask the governments that we did this kind of a study, you can use it in your planning and executions.
Ajmal, that's clear. Sorry, Asim, that's clear. Ajmal, what do you think about all of this?
Well, thank you, Asim. Aside from the fact that there was an interruption to your presentation, I mean, many questions, of course, about the mechanism, the vehicle by which you go to establish a plan and a set of recommendations as you've done. I think interviews, community engagement, engagement with authorities, engagement with academic institutions and other professionals. I think this is all part and parcel of the preparatory process. But along the lines of what Bohdan asked, my question would be to you, how much willingness do you sense in, I mean, the communities, of course, are always very, very happy to receive support, particularly if it helps improve their environments and living conditions. But how much willingness did you see in institutions and planning institutions, municipality, Ministry of Urban Development, other entities responsible for governance and also implementation, to the ideas that you have? I mean, are they very receptive is the first aspect of this question. The second is, are they in a position in terms of capacity or perhaps even resources to implement any of your recommendations?
Thank you so much for your hard questions. I'm not in a position to answer the willingness of the government because I'm just one normal citizen, and I'm not in a position to dictate or to do something here. So I should be careful, very careful on answering your question. Based on my experience, I hope that there is some willingness in the existing government staff to preserve. I hope. But it is better to say, I don't know. I can say, I don't know exactly how they react and how much willingness exists in the among the decision makers.
It's important simply because, I mean, one is the urban structure and urban environment. In a city like Herat, with as much pressure as it has, economic pressure, it never stands still. Any plans that are drawn up today, in 2 years, you'd have to revise those plans because the city is constantly on the move. And I think in that sense, plans have to be flexible and dynamic as well. Perhaps you're more cautious, but I'm less cautious. I would say that the capacity, planning capacity that exists in institutions to be able to engage on this is limited in many ways. There is
Yeah,
a willingness.
exactly.
I think the willingness is there, but the capacity to engage, the capacity to imagine, to have the visions or to have shared visions or to even contribute to the process are
Yeah,
limited. And
yeah.
in that context, how does a planner, how does an architect, how does a researcher deal with the conflicts, the realities, the challenges on the ground to be able to come up with plans perhaps that are more attuned or consider those challenges and then make recommendations? Perhaps it's an issue of scale, perhaps it's an issue of context. I mean, do you feel that there's room for that?
You answered your second question, which was the um, about the uh, planners situation. Based on my experience during my interviews, the planners, the governmental planners, I mean, have no even basic knowledge about the preservation, conservation, architectural heritage, cultural assets. They don't have, unfortunately, even the basics of such knowledge. And there is no professional, I can say, compared to other countries that I have visited their cultural assets and heritage. I can say the government staff, technical staff, I mean, is so weak as they have just got their bachelor's degree in general studies, civil engineering, for example. They have not been trained. So one of my proposals for the government and the AKTC and other related organizations is to have training programs done to put the training programs in their priority. Because if you train 10 civil engineers in Herat to protect the cultural assets. It is a big support for the protection and preservation of the whole city and the heritage. I think if there are some trainings, is one of the best ways to amplify the preservation process in the country.
Okay, I think
Because
we passed our limit, and this is a good place to end, especially for somebody at university. In other words, you have to do research, but it's not good enough to do research. You have you have those who implement, and if those who implement don't know very much, I suppose it would be very helpful if they didn't do anything rather than to do something inappropriate.
exactly.
Maybe the fact that they don't do anything at this stage is probably a good idea. But I think that one should use every opportunity. We certainly can do something. This is something that would be of interest for ARI, and certainly I'm sure for the Aga Khan Trust cultural. What do you call yourself now? Aga Khan Cultural
It's
Service.
Cultural Services Afghanistan, yes.
That one of the cultural services that could be mounted is actually training of the staff. Well, look, guys, thank you very, very much for this. Herat is a truly remarkable city. I think most people should try to look it up, at least in Wikipedia, to see that this is something that started in around 300 BC. And has continued since then. It's a colossal asset. And the other thing one can say about Herat is that that city has influenced a certain type of people with a certain type of mind and a certain type of attitude. I do know some people who worked at the University of Herat, and it was a joy to work with them. An old city has an environment and has an impact on culture, which is very different than if you live in the other context. Thank you very much. Thank you, participants. This entire lecture is going to be put in the next couple of days on our YouTube channel. And if you want to see, just go on YouTube and put Afghanistan Research Initiative.